Hello. Today I will be presenting on an article taken from Education Week in June of 2017. And the title is Too Few ELL Students Land in Gifted Classes. I was originally inspired to do some research on this topic based on my own experiences as the gifted support teacher at SES. I know firsthand the real frustration of seeing a student whose greatness is locked behind a language barrier. In the 2 years that I have served as the gifted support teacher, I have only had one English language learner to be recommended for testing by teachers. Gifted children can be found in every culture and speaking every language, but school districts must make a deliberate effort to seek these students out. So, as we go through this presentation today, we're going to really take a look at what this idea of too few ELL students landing in gifted classes really means to the children and also what it means to the school district itself. Underrepresentation and equity. In this article, the issue of underrepresentation in gifted education is examined. 49 of the 50 states and Washington, D.C. have a population of EL students that is disproportionate to the number of students identified as gifted. California, Nevada, New Mexico, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. have the widest gaps. And interestingly enough, California, Nevada, and New Mexico also have a large share of all the English learners in schools nationwide. So as you're taking a look at this map, the easiest way to explain it is the darker the shade, the wider the gap. And when we think about underrepresentation and equity, if you have a school system, for example, that has about 7% of their student body as ELL, then the expectation, generally speaking, is that the population of students that are identified as gifted for ELL will be, around 7%, give or take. It could be less, it could be a little higher, but if you have 7% of your population as ELL, you definitely should not have only 1% identified as gifted. So when we see that huge disparity in numbers, that's an automatic red flag for underrepresentation. Looking at where Georgia stands, for example, we are not as high on the list in terms of underrepresentation, but there is still work to do in making sure that we identify students who are many times looked over. So, for this article, the authors took a look at a case study for the Tulsa School District in Oklahoma. And just to give you a little bit of background information, this district is comprised of 36,000 students. And it has double the percentage of English language learners as compared with the state. But the percentage of gifted English learners in this district is the same as the state. So, based on what I explained to you in the previous slide, if you have double the amount of English language learners, then theoretically you should not have the same percentage as the state. So the authors took a look at the Tulsa School District and their efforts to bring equity to gifted education. The district was, to their credit, determined to attack the problem and revamp their referral and identification processes so that the lack of language proficiency will not keep students from receiving gifted services. The Tulsa school system found that because students lacked English proficiency, teachers were less likely to refer them for gifted testing, thinking that gifted students should look or sound a particular way, hints at teacher biases. And we've done some research on teacher biases and just being reflective of our own practices earlier in this course, and we found out that our personal attitudes and perceptions about education, about ourselves, about others does have an impact on how we interact with our students. So, though it may be unconscious, the belief in English language development as an indicator of intelligence causes teachers sometimes to overlook EL students. It was also noted in this article that most eligibility tests for gifted were language based, which places EL students at a clear disadvantage as compared to those who have English as their first language. One of the things that the Tulsa School District also noted was that they realized that they were looking at students from what they called in the article a deficit model. So you have students who may not have a certain language proficiency, and this happens to a lot of us. We look at the things that they are not able to do as well, and we focus on those. So students were viewed as not meeting standards versus taking a look at their strengths and saying, okay, we can capitalize on the things that they do well in order to bring out their abilities. In this next slide, we talk about the action plan and the results that the school district put into place as they attempted to bring again some equity to gifted education in their district. So one of the things that was put into place was the universal screening using nonverbal assessments. And universal screening simply means that instead of waiting on students to be referred to the gifted program by teachers or parents, they take a grade level, for example, the entire second grade population, and just do a blanket testing of everybody. We all know there are some students, for a number of reasons, who may be overlooked. So doing universal testing, blanket testing of a particular group ensures or helps to ensure that nobody will fall through the cracks. So in an effort to correct their issue, Tulsa and districts with similar situations are electing to give these universal screeners that don't rely on language proficiency to detect intelligence and ability. And the ones that we see listed on this slide, the COGAT and the NAT, those are nonverbal tests where students don't have to listen, they don't have to speak in order to show their level of intelligence. They have to recognize relationships and patterns. And so those children who are not as developed in their language are not at the disadvantage that they normally would be. Parents are also able to complete behavioral checklists that give them the opportunity to share what their children are like at home in a comfortable setting. And we know that this is helpful because in some of our other course readings, we talked about how EL students are often less likely to be vocal in class and less likely to show off their mental prowess simply because of their cultural differences. Schools began to take note of students who were acquiring English faster than others as a possible indicator of intelligence. And teachers were also encouraged to have students who showed potential to begin participating in science and math clubs where the playing field again is more level because the language barrier is not as high in math and in a lot of areas of science. One thing that we like to note from this slide is that because of the work that they did, the gifted population, um, there was a dip from 2014. They started at 5,400 students. It dipped to 4,100 students, but this year, 2017, it has gone back up to 4,500. So those measures are making a difference. And I'm glad to say that Georgia already uses these multiple measures to identify students who could possibly be gifted. This last slide, I really took note of a line that I saw in the article by the Gifted Education Coordinator. Any child who can translate for their parents and is decoding in two languages all the time, that's huge. We need to push back against this perception that giftedness has to look a certain way. So I encourage you as you go to your schools to really share this information. Take a second look at those students who may not have language proficiency.